En-ROADS with Katherine from Climate Interactive. And it's really what we're going to explore is how plant-based foods play an integral role for a thriving, healthy future for all of us. I'm going to introduce our two other speakers today. Samantha Lau is a city campaigner for the Plant-Based Treaty, a global grassroots campaign that advocates for plant-based food systems to fight climate change and for sustainability. And Katherine Markova leads partnerships at Climate Interactive, which is a climate modeling and education nonprofit. I'm going to pass it over to Katherine.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's wonderful to see you all here today. Thank you for joining us. So as Julie said, I lead partnerships in an organization called Climate Interactive. And in the spirit of this session being interactive, I'm going to kick us off with a poll. So you have a couple of options. You can either follow this link. I'm going to drop it in the chat. You can either follow this link, or you can just scan this QR code and access Poll EV software. I'm going to activate this poll. The question for you is, what are nature-based solutions? When you hear the word nature-based solution, what do you think? What do you think of? What comes to mind? And if you're using 2 or 3 words or more, please hyphenate them. So either scan this QR code with your phone. You don't have to introduce yourself. Just click skip and yeah, give us your thoughts. Give us your ideas. What are nature-based solutions? So either follow that link to Poll Review software or just scan this QR code with your phone. I can see people starting to vote. 2 votes. Keep voting. We're going to show and share results in a moment. Okay, more of you voting. Thank you. Give it another minute. 5, 7. Okay. All right, I think we're at quorum. All right, nature-based solutions, natural, wonderful, solutions, nature, rewilding, solutions in harmony with the ecosystem, wonderful. Thank you all for voting. And I can see just about here, we have agriculture and food systems. So thank you for those who've identified plant-based diets as a nature-based solution. This is often overlooked. The UN defines nature-based solutions as actions to protect, conserve, restore, and sustainably use terrestrial, freshwater, coastal, and marine ecosystem. I'm reading the official definition. What is one of the ways we can protect terrestrial ecosystems is by preventing deforestation. And one way to prevent deforestation is by adopting plant-based diets. And because we will need less agricultural land overall, we can also plant trees. So it's a double win. And it's not just terrestrial trees. Mangroves play a really, really big role in this as well. They're really impacted by fertilizer and agricultural runoff. And we'll be exploring these impacts in detail throughout the webinar. All right. Thank you very much. We're going to deactivate this poll. Julie, are you seeing lines on the screen, or is it just me?
Yeah, Katherine, I'm seeing lines on the screen right now.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's happening. But let me maybe start another. Oh, no, that doesn't really help. My question is, somebody seems to be drawing lines. So if you know how to undo that, I'd really appreciate that. Oh, there you go. Thank you so much. Wow, that gave me a little mini heart attack. All right, so let me introduce you to our model, En-ROADS. It's a climate model that we at Climate Interactive have co-developed with MIT. And we developed this model for 2 reasons. One is a now, I think, famous quote by one of our collaborators at MIT Sloan, that research shows that showing people research doesn't work. right? People just don't have time to read 200-page scientific papers. They don't have time to just look at endless charts and graphs and be bombarded with data. People need a tool, a way of experimenting and learning for themselves and testing their assumptions and building mental models. And that's why we've developed this interactive model. The other guiding principle here is we wanted to give policymakers and decision makers and advocates and everyone else the ability to simulate the different climate solutions that we have and their relative leverage, simulate and see what works and what doesn't, and what's most effective and what's most effective in the quickest possible time frame. And the idea here behind the simulate is, airline pilots, they don't go from studying theory to flying planes, right? 747s. There's an intermediate step, which is going on a simulator. So that's why we built it. We've essentially loaded it with thousands of data points. So this is everything that's gone into the soup. So we've loaded thousands of data points on energy production and consumption and climate data and population growth and consumption and land use and industry, which is most relevant to this webinar. So there's 1,000 of different data inputs, all from scientific papers, peer-reviewed scientific papers. And then we've applied thousands of calculations to this using system dynamics principles. So this model is really based on system dynamics principles. We then created this super user-friendly interface. We put the model on the browser. We've translated it into 21 languages. And as I said, it's an open source model, so it's free at the point of use. And even though there's thousands of data inputs and calculations, if I move a slider here, or if I change a particular variable, it updates automatically, so it gives me immediate feedback. And that's what's really separates this model from others that, most of them are not very accessible to people like you and me. They sit in academic institutions. And what you're looking at here is our baseline. So baseline is the state of the world as of today. So it takes into account all the policies already in place. Some of you will be familiar with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US that provided all sorts of incentives for clean energy and clean tech, takes into account those policies. It takes into account technological breakthroughs, progress ratios, learning curves, investments we've made as of today, but then assumes we take no further action on climate. And the idea here is that you can then simulate, well, what impact will these additional policies or strategies or investments or personal lifestyle choices, like choosing a plant-based diet, what will it do to our baseline? Now, the baseline, not good news. We're headed towards 3.3 degrees of warming by the end of the century. We know where we need to be. We need to be well under 2 degrees of warming. And I'm talking about Celsius, but you can also take a look and see what that means in Fahrenheit. As we know, the goal of the Paris Agreement is to get us well below 2 degrees and as close as possible to 1.5. This curve doesn't look very encouraging. We do have good news. For example, renewable energy, as you can see, this is where we get all our energy from globally. This is a global model, right? This is an average of all the actions. This is not a US model. This is not a California model. This is where we get our energy from in the year 2025, right? We still have about a third of it coming from coal. We have oil, we have gas. But look, renewables are forecast to grow between now and the end of the century. So that's obviously very positive. We have interesting curves here too we can show around electric vehicle adoption and how rapidly electric share transport sales is going to be over almost 50% by the end of the century. So we have some good news. We have some bad news as well. And what we've done is to really ground the discussion at what it means for you, what you really care about. We've mapped out about 170 different impacts. So you can take a look at the number of extreme heat days in, say, Sacramento, or we can take a look at extinction risk of endemic species, right? And the idea here is, first of all, to see, how much worse it's getting by decade, right? And look at these curves of, extinction risk of land species and marine species. Marine species are much more susceptible to extinction risk. But again, the idea here is not to get depressed, but build a scenario of success collectively that gets us to the goals of the Paris Agreement, somewhere close to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, if we still believe that that's possible. And we have all these different solutions and interventions. We actually have a lot of things that we know work and work effectively and cost effectively. So, you know, on the left-hand side, we have energy supply. So we have interventions in connection with shutting down fossil fuels, investing in renewable energy. There's a lot of interest in nuclear right now. In the middle, we'll have different solutions around transport, so energy efficiency, electrification, same with buildings and industry, population growth, economic growth. And then this is where we'll spend most of the webinar today, is on the right-hand side, is solutions around nature and carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere. We know that we need to stop emitting, but we also know that we need to remove some of that carbon already in the atmosphere. So we have nature-based solutions around tree planting, afforestation, reforestation. We have agricultural emissions. This is where plant-based diets sit. You can click on these 3 dots and you can see how much more functionality there is in the model. Then we have waste and leakage, so preventing stuff from ending up in landfills, and then prevention of deforestation. Okay. Before we go into the detail of the model, though, I just wanted to tell you about how we actually use it. So who used the model? Policymakers, that was the original use case. So we've been to US Congress, California State Senate, mayors of different cities. Business leaders use it, particularly financial institutions, banks, financial institutions. Educators all around the world have incorporated this model in the curricula, in their classes. Researchers, advocates. So Citizens Climate Lobby, for example, in the US has a really large team of people that use En-ROADS to engage with their Congress people. Climate Reality Project are big fans of our work. And then various nonprofits as well. So, because we have interactive in the name, I'm going to run my second poll and I'm going to activate it. Use the same process. So either follow that link or just scan this QR code. Let's just ground ourselves in what actually causes global warming, and think like really, really macro trends. Don't think like, oh, we're driving too much in LA, or we have heavy, meat diets, the diets that are heavy on meat. Those are all contributors. But in terms of like super macro trends, what is actually causing the climate crisis and global warming? Because that will lead us to explore some of these dynamics in the model. Thank you for voting. You can see 7, 8 of you, 9, 11. Great. This is actually kind of an advanced question. This is quite complicated, but I'm sure you'll ace it. All right, let's go take a look. Billionaires, yes, love that. You're onto something, yes. Agriculture, yes, big on animal capitalism. Yeah, so billionaires and capitalism, I'll put them in the same bucket. Overconsumption, yes. Yes, human emissions. So you've certainly identified one, and I'm going to put corporate greed, capitalism, and billionaires in the same economic driver. There's another thing and growth and consumerism alongside as well, consumption. There's one component that's missing. But okay, let's go and explore. At a very, very, very macro level, what is happening in the world is that we have a global population that's growing. So that's another big contributing factor. So we right now in 2025 are a happy family of 8 billion people. It's going to increase to 10 billion by the end of the century. Okay, we'll come back to that. Those people are consuming more and more what are called GDP per capita, global domestic product. So that's increasing. Now that's good news and bad news. It's good news because we're lifting people out of poverty. People in low and middle income countries can afford to buy their first scooter or their car and send their child to school. But as you pointed out, we have overconsumption and billionaires and wasteful production. That GDP, so that those goods and services that we're consuming, that takes energy to manufacture, and we call it energy intensity of GDP. Now, this is actually another good news in the model. It's falling because we're innovating, right? We are innovating. It takes less energy to produce that GDP per capita. we're also increasingly deriving more and more of our incomes from services rather than manufactured goods. And then finally, that energy has certain carbon intensity. So that's a mix of fossil fuels and renewables on the grid. Multiply those four out, and we get CO2 emissions from energy, which we'll see in a moment is one of the biggest drivers of climate change. But what's relevant for us here in the context of today's discussion is because we do have that global population that is growing. Diets. We have so many graphs, it is difficult to even find them. Diet. I'll find it in a second. So what we have is we have farmland area that's growing. So because we have more people on the planet, we need to grow more crops, right? And this doesn't seem like a big increase, but it's 10% between now and the end of the century, the amount of land that we'll need to grow crops, both for people, but also to feed to animals that then people eat. That's going to increase by about 10%. Now, one of the good news is that crop yield is actually increasing. So we're innovating. We're actually able to grow more crops now with improved agricultural practices. But in terms of how much people are, that's the graph I was looking for. Phew. So the percent of food from animals. As we've just said, we have population is growing, more food is required. Also, we know that when GDP grows, when incomes grow, people add meat to their diet. And look, right now in 2025, this is again, global picture, 23%, we derive about 23% of our diet from animals. It's going to increase by about 28%. Doesn't sound like much. It's huge increase. So we have these trends that we need to be aware of. But let's just ground ourselves. What is animal agriculture's contribution to climate change? And I'm going to show you these two graphs. Yep. All right. So the first one is, let's just see how much animal agriculture contributes to global warming. We have all these different sources of emissions. Now, again, this is global. This looks different, particularly when I talk about methane. I'll show you that it looks different in different locations, but on average. So again, let's look at 2025. This slice of emissions is green, is land use. So this is net of emissions and removals. So emissions and removals from deforestation, forest degradation, afforestation, so replanting trees, carbon that's stored in our soil, and then new technologies like biochar, right? And there's a distinction here between deforestation, which is when the entire forest disappears, and then what we refer to as forest degradation, which is essentially a targeted reduction of biomass from either forest fires or harvesting of forests for like wood products and bioenergy. So that's a big chunk of it comes from deforestation because of animal agriculture. Then this huge slice is fossil fuel CO2. Let's just be clear that the biggest driver of global warming and greenhouse gas emissions is still burning of fossil fuels for energy. So let's acknowledge that. Then we have this small slice of F-gases. What are F-gases? F-gases are fluorinated gases. So this is a group of really, really highly potent human-generated greenhouse gases. And the important point about them is that they're thousands of times more potent and harmful than carbon dioxide. And guess where F-gases come from? Air conditioners, but also refrigeration of, for example, animal products, okay? Then the next big slice, and by the way, look, land use CO2 is growing, it's not decreasing. I mean, everything is growing here. F-gases are increasing. The next slice is methane, right? And methane, we'll talk about methane in a moment, but also really very potent gas. And then finally at the top, we have NTO, which is nitrous oxide. And the main source of emissions from nitrous oxide is essentially synthetic fertilizers, nitrogen fertilizers, again, that are heavily used in agriculture and really toxic and have high global warming potential. But let's talk about methane. And Methane right now sort of globally breaks out about 30, 40, where some of it comes from energy production. So that's mainly just leakage of methane from like gas pipes. Then we have some coming from industry, and that could be waste or some byproduct of agricultural processes, industrial processes, I'm sorry. And then this yellow slice is agriculture. And once again, look how it's expanding, right? Maybe you're reducing tiny bit towards an essential, but really expanding into the 60s and 80s. And the issue with methane is that over about the first 20 years out of release of methane, it's about 80 times more potent and more effective at trapping greenhouse gases than carbon dioxide, right? So methane and fluorinated gases are short-lived, what we refer to as short-lived climate pollutants. So whilst they don't stay in the atmosphere as long, they're much more potent than these. And that's why it's really, really important for us to be taking action on methane like as soon as possible, right? Because it's so much more effective early on. And I'm not even talking about air pollution. Air pollution obviously is a huge issue around animal agriculture facilities. So that's another thing which we don't have in the model, but needs to be acknowledged. And methane, unfortunately, doesn't get as much attention from policymakers as carbon dioxide. Now, having just said this is a global picture. Julie, Sam, and I are all in California. In California, this looks very different. In California, this yellow slice, methane from agriculture, is twice the amount of the other two combined because we have such a huge animal agricultural industry here. Okay, and by the way, it's almost entirely unregulated. Big agricultural farms don't have to report emissions or can take any action on their emissions. All right, so now we've grounded ourselves. Most of the emissions comes from fossil fuel CO2. Big chunk of it, though, also comes from land use and misuse, you can argue, and a component of that is animal agriculture. Okay, let's go back and start building a scenario of success. Let's assume that we're really, really successful with deployment of renewables. And typically I'd run another poll at this point, but that's okay. And I'm going to ask you, at least make a prediction in your mind. What happens if the entire world, the only thing we're focused on as the global society, is providing incentives for renewable energy? If I move the slide all the way to the right, it means everyone goes full in on renewable energy. And if I'm talking to younger audiences, I'll say everyone in the world gets a solar panel. And I want you to make a mental prediction as to what happens to the global temperature. Right now at 3.3 degrees of warming, what's going to happen? I'm going to move the slide. It's going to drop down to 3.2. I hear some gasps like, oh, no, I thought renewable energy was the solution to everything. We need renewable energy, but we need renewable energy not for its own sake. What we need renewable energy to be doing is effectively competing with fossil fuels. And if I show you this, what's happening is when we subsidize renewable energy, it squeezes out coal, it squeezes out gas, but it hardly does anything to oil, because electricity produced from renewable energy sources is not a direct substitute to gas that we use in our cars and planes and ships. So let's assume we are very ambitious in our policy to equitably phase out fossil fuels. And let's say that gets us to 2.9 degrees globally. Let's assume we're really good at electrifying everything. And let's assume we invest in energy efficiency, which, by the way, look at that. Look, if I move the slide, energy efficiency in buildings. Whoa, it's just shaved off 0.3 of a degree. Really effective solution. Again, often overlooked by policymakers, not very, very sexy, but very, very effective and relatively inexpensive as well. Let's assume we do all of that. That gets us to 2.5, and we need to be at least 2. So that means that nature-based solutions can and should help us bridge that gap and get us closer to 2 degrees, right? And so let's model the impact of plant-based diets as one component of a strategy of nature-based solutions. So if I click on these 3 dots, and by the way, if you really want to get to know the model, and I hope you will, if you click on this help button, we have all sorts of examples of different types of strategies that can be implemented to reduce methane emissions, nitrous oxide, big messages, key dynamics, co-benefits, equity considerations, all sorts of, we've made FAQs and videos, so there's a ton of information, okay? So what happens if I go to advanced settings, and right now in the model, by default, we assume that about 30% of our diets come from animals by the end of the century. You can simulate that reducing to about 10%. That's the minimum that we think is achievable. I'd love to be at 0%, but let's assume. So that's shaved off 0.1 of a degree. And by the way, every fraction of a degree matters because, let's see, I'm going to choose my two favorite graphs here. Let's see how much we can help. We already helped Sacramento somewhat, at least parts around Sacramento. So this is a toggle between the baseline. This is where we're without any action on climate. And this is where we are with this scenario we're building together. Same with species losing more than 50% of climatic range. This is a very dangerous situation for species to be in. With just even reduction to 2.5, with just 2.4, we've just almost halved some of those potential extinction events. So food from animals gives us another 0.1 of a degree, which is really important because every fraction of a degree matters. Let's assume we'll also take action on waste, right? We're wasting a lot of, food of crops and animal waste as well. So, and by the way, when I move this slide, look what happens to methane. Look how much of methane gets squeezed out immediately, right? Because animal agriculture is such a big contributor of methane emissions. So let's do that. I'm going to throw it actually back to my co-presenters. What else happens when we reduce the amount of meat products that we consume? So what we have is obviously we reduce methane, we reduce nitrous oxide, we prevent deforestation, right? So more trees can remain intact, and that means they're continuing to sequester carbon dioxide, and by not deforesting our planet, we're also not releasing that carbon into the atmosphere, the ones that have already been sequestered. So you see, it's a double benefit, right? So when you chop down a tree, you release all that carbon into the atmosphere, and you essentially prevent that tree from sequestering more. So it's a double whammy. But what else happens? What else happens when we what happens when we bring that meat into our supermarkets, right, in our grocery stores? What else happens?
Maybe less refrigeration is used?
Exactly. So let's also, F-gases. I told you how F-gases are thousands of times more potent than carbon dioxide. Let's see we can reduce F-gas releases as well. So that gives us another degree. Okay, what happens? I'm going to cheat here a little bit. Let's assume we did an electrified transport. This is energy efficiency in transport, which is reducing miles. Sam, what else happens when we reduce our meat consumption?
You eliminate transportation for the meat?
Exactly. So what happens if you think about, we're growing crops to bring to animal agriculture facilities, and then we are moving those animals to the abattoirs, right? And so we're doubling the amount of miles that are required. So this is the way we model a reduction of food miles is through energy efficiency, essentially making energy efficiency better. So as you can see, we can improve that as well. So with plant-based diets, let's just summarize, we are reducing the amount of methane that we're emitting, which is really, really highly potent. Same goes from nitrous oxide as well. So we're reducing the amount of this fertilizer that we use, which is extremely toxic as well and causes runoffs and damages our mangroves, for example. Then with less land that's needed for grazing and growing livestock, we're allowing more forest and wild areas to remain intact. So we are keeping all that carbon already banked in the soil and trees, and we're not releasing it into the atmosphere. We're also reducing the demand for food crops, so there's more food to be grown for that increasing global population of human beings. And I didn't even mention water, of course. Animal agriculture is very, water intensive and thirsty. So we're also preserving water stocks. Obviously, we're large parts of the world where we have drought. So this is only going to get worse again with growing population. Cold chain emissions, so refrigeration, we need less refrigerant, which again is very, very highly potent. And then finally, we're reducing those air miles, so fewer trucks on the road. So that gets us to really, and by the way, now we also have more land to plant trees, so we can plant trees. This is also very highly effective nature-based solution. Okay. Now, planting trees is great. It's not as effective as deforestation because, as I said, deforestation is effective immediately. Planting trees, it takes a while to see the benefit of these actions, right? Absolutely very, very much needed, as you can see, very effective climate solution, but it takes time for trees to grow. Like it takes maybe 12 years until they start really sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. And then it takes about 50 years until the tree's fully grown, and then, fully grown to the point where it's like maximizing its capturing carbon. And then it takes about, 100 years to grow. It depends obviously on the type of tree. But so deforestation has immediate impact as opposed to planting trees takes a while. But look, we're almost got to 2 degrees. I'm going to do something else to help. Let's just move a couple of dials more. There you go. More energy efficiency in transport gets us to 2 degrees. So it is still technologically and financially possible to get to 2 degrees of warming, even to 1.5, although politically might not be possible. And look how much better things are in the Sierras. By the way, we can check out Los Angeles as well. But you can downscale this map. This block is about 22 by 22. And then we have these species losing more than 50% of climatic range. That's the full breakdown. Look, with this 2 degree scenarios, we've just reduced a loss of birds 23%. Can you imagine us losing a quarter of our birds by then? So I just cannot contemplate it. So, but we've reduced it to 7%. Still not ideal, but much, much, much better. And then we can see parts of Ventura County that are not. The gradations here are really important. 1 to 3 months of days of extreme heat over 90 degrees is very different to 3 to 6 months. 3 to 6 months, you're putting a lot more of your population in danger of essentially what could be a mortality level. So coming to the end of this demo, I just wanted to signpost that, first of all, there's no one single solution to climate change, right? It's not even renewable energy by itself, and it's not nuclear, and it's not energy efficiency in buildings, and it's not just plant-based diets. It takes a combination of them, right? But each one is very valid, and each fraction of degree matters, right? There are some things that are lower lift, like energy efficiency. Plant-based diets do not rely on big policy shifts, right? Phase out fossil fuels is an enormous undertaking. A city switching its procurement to plant-based menus is a much, much more quicker solution that doesn't require as much political, not a huge political undertaking. And it's also a superpower that all of us individually have that we can exercise 3 times a day each day. I'm going to stop here. There's a lot more that I could show you, but now I'm going to turn it over to Sam to talk about plant-based treaty and all the great work you're doing over there.
Thank you, Katherine. Thank you for showing us such an amazing tool. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm a campaigner with Plant-Based Treaty, and I am here to talk about how we engage policymakers and stakeholders about using a plant-based food system as a nature-based solutions to fight climate change. First, let me give everyone a quick overview of what Plant-Based Treaty is. We are a global grassroots campaign, worldwide initiative to fight climate change by centering the food system. Our mission is to promote a shift towards a just plant-based food system that would enable us to live safely within our planetary boundaries and reforest the earth. And our vision is a global plant-based treaty attached to the Paris agreement and best practices in the plant-based food policy implemented by cities and other institutions. We urge local governments and municipalities to adopt plant-based food policies and to initiate public information campaigns on educating why plant-based defaults are an important lever to reach carbon neutrality. Next slide, please. So we currently have 41 cities that gave us an endorsement, and we're working actively with them for policy change. We also have almost 250,000 of individuals who endorse us, plus many other organizations and businesses that endorse us. This gives us support for talking to legislators and policymakers. Next slide, please. And these are our core principles. Basically, we have redirect, which is an active transition away from animal-based food system to plant-based food system, and relinquish, which is no land use change, ecosystem degradation or deforestation for animal agriculture, and to restore. Actively restoring key ecosystems, particularly restoring forests and rewilding landscapes. So restore. This is exactly what we're talking about when we talked about nature-based solutions. We have been talking about throughout the webinar. We need to rewild the earth, reforest the land, and restore the forests in the oceans so that these nature-based solutions are able to help us sequester carbon. Next slide, please. Right now, our current food system is very unsustainable. It is only providing 37% of global protein, 18% of global calories, while 83% of farmland use is for animal agriculture, and 71% of global deforestation. So, it's a very unsustainable system, but in order for land to be freed up, we need the global demand for animal-based products to decrease. Next slide, please. So as you can see, if we switch to a plant-based food system, we would reduce land use by 75%. And this would be how we can apply those nature-based solutions in order to prevent climate change from exacerbating. As you saw from the En-ROAD simulator, global population is expected to increase along with an increase to average income, and that means meat consumption is going to go up. So in order for these nature-based solutions to take place, we need a shift in our food system to decrease demand for meat consumption so that we can stop clear-cutting the land for animal farming. Next slide, please. So why are nature-based solutions so mission critical, and how can we talk to policymakers and stakeholders about this? While phasing out fossil fuel and decarbonization and renewable energies are very important, it requires a lot of capital and a lot of years to complete. So when we speak to policymakers, we want to highlight the fact that, it's important to do renewable energy, but at the same time, we also need to have some quick solutions. Plant-based defaults and nudges are very quick and effective. We can see results and measure impact within 6 to 12 months. For example, LA County, they have implemented a procurement process to reduce the amount of meat they're purchasing and increase plant-based food purchasing. And then they also mandated impact measurement because they know that within 6 to 12 months, they'll be able to see the results of greenhouse gas emissions being lowered. And that way you can see the results much faster than decarbonizing and renewable energy. And En-ROAD has been used by ambassadors all over the world to advocate for climate policies. It's a very powerful tool to show how plant-based food strategies is one of the most important shifts we can make for carbon reduction, protecting biodiversity, and rewilding our land and oceans. We need nature-based solutions that are quick to market, and food is the leading focus for our environment. So these are just some of the ways that you can talk to stakeholders and policymakers when you want to explain the science behind why it's so important to look at plant-based food policy. Not only it will give you faster results, it is a lot less to accomplish these solutions. So next slide, please. So I'm going to hand it over to Julie, who will talk about some use case as to what New York has done for plant-based policies.
Thank you, Sam. My name's Julie Schultz. I'm from the Better Food Foundation. We work really closely with Sam at Plant-Based Treaty and about 40 other organizations that are working on shifting our societies to a plant-based diet. And we use behavioral science to do that. As Sam mentioned, uh, using plant-based defaults and nudges, which is behavioral science, is one of the most effective ways. And we wanted to show you one use case. That happened in 2021. 11 New York hospitals, they serve plant-based defaults for lunch and dinner with really amazing results. They save 59 cents per meal. They saved $462,000 in 2023. And they have about 90% satisfaction rate from from the people in the hospitals. And really, which was really a great number, was 36% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. That same food service company, Sodexo, they've also made plant-based nudges a standard feature of cafeterias at universities as well. And it's hundreds of them over North America, over 400. Also, the University of San Diego, Erasmus University, Pitzer College, and the University of Michigan, they serve oat milk as the default on campus cafes. So these behavioral science can be used on food and also on drink. And then faculty departments, clubs, and events at New York University, Harvard University, and many other schools have made a policy of serving plant-based meals as the default. So as you can see, there's a lot of solutions here regarding around plant-based, and I love what En-ROADS shows us the entire picture, not just the carbon picture, but really the entire picture, including biodiversity, the methane. I think that's something that we need to look at. That's a near solution if we can lower methane. So I hope this was super helpful. I do want to put it over to Katherine to talk about, you guys can use this tool anytime you want. And Katherine, could you let us know about the training that's going to be happening this summer?
Yes, absolutely. I'd be delighted to. So when we go back to the simulator, that's the best way to find it. You can click on En-ROADS training. So we have a free, at the point of use, self-paced training, which is called Mastering En-ROADS, available anytime. It really depends. People always ask me, how long does it take? It really depends on how much time you have to dedicate to it every day, but you can probably do it in 2 days. Like if you really, really dedicate yourself, most people take it over 6 to 8 weeks. And on July 1st, we will have a cohort-based 4-week intensive program, again, free, where it's not just an opportunity to learn about En-ROADS and how to use it and how to engage policymakers with it, but it will also teach advanced facilitation techniques. And that's how we make these workshops interactive. We ask people to make predictions, build mental models, challenge their own assumptions. So it's a combination of learning about climate science, learning about En-ROADS, learning about facilitation techniques, and most importantly, you also build a community. Last year, we had 4,000 people sign up to do it. 200 graduated and became our ambassadors. Sam mentioned earlier that we have this network of 900 ambassadors that we've trained up all over the world in different walks of life that use En-ROADS to have conversations with decision makers to advance science-based policy, including on nature-based solutions. So please sign up. You can do so by June 26th, and hopefully we'll see you there.
Thank you, everyone. I am going to open it up to a Q&A. If anybody has any questions, you have 2 options. You can put your hand up and we'll call on you. Or if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat and we can pose those questions to Katherine. And we'll just have a little discussion until someone asks a question. I know I have some questions. What do you think the best way, and what I really liked about the simulator, and I think Sam and I were talking about this earlier, is we really default on talking about carbon and plant-based food. And that doesn't really give us the full picture. And I think that's something that, many companies are definitely tracking their carbon emissions. We have universities doing it, we have corporate companies doing it, but food often gets overlooked. And I think the water, land, and biodiversity is something that we really miss in that picture. So I'd love to hear, Katherine, how would you recommend that we use this tool to really paint that picture better for the institutions that we're working with?
Right. Well, thank you for that question. Well, as I said, I think it starts with acknowledgement that we do have this really, really big issue with fossil fuel. Energy consumption and production is increasing. Still, we're not decarbonizing fast enough. The most effective way to decarbonize is by taxing pollution, so internalizing some of those costs. We're just not making enough progress. We need to continue making progress on equitable fossil fuel phase out. But as I said, we have these other solutions that we know work, like adoption of electric vehicles is growing. Not everyone can afford to buy an electric vehicle, but they're a pleasure to drive, and they have all sorts of different co-benefits, cheaper to run over the life cycle. We have investments we can make in energy efficiency, right? So we have all these known solutions, and one of them is plant-based diets. As we've discussed, it's actually there's so much discussion around carbon dioxide. I think policymakers just not focused on other short-lived pollutants. I know some advocacy groups have really made it the focus of their work. So I think we're gradually raising awareness. Like last year, we published a storytelling, so informational article on F gases. What are F gases? Like most potent greenhouse gas in the world. And if I say F gases to anyone on the street, they don't even know what I mean, right? And so what we've done is we've set out all the different ways that we can reduce those F gas emissions, but also actually save costs in the process. The same goes for agriculture. There are practices, better agricultural practices that reduce emissions, reduce water use, save money for farmers. They don't need to use as much expensive fertilizer, etc. So I guess my answer is, let's just continue acknowledging that we need clean energy transition, but we also have other solutions that are also equally important in contributing to the overall picture, because it's not just going to be the energy system that we need to shift. We need a whole-scale shift in how we travel and where we work, and what we eat, and how we get out in nature, so we have all these different cultural solutions as well as technological ones. And that's why we developed the simulator, because it's a kind of a fun way to engage with people and meeting them where they are. And, for policymakers interested in exploring energy, great, but maybe they don't want to talk about energy. Like in California, we don't talk about coal anymore. We have one coal plant left, but we do have a huge agricultural sector, right? So we can really shift people's minds in that area.
Thank you. Does anyone have a question? I see some faces. If not, I can read off what's in the chat area. Okay. First question was from Madeline. For En-ROADS, can you remind me where all the data points are pulled from?
Yeah, so there's thousands of different data inputs. So, for example, the population growth comes from the UN. That's the best source of data. By the way, we do literature review, so we look at what's out there and then determine what's the best data source. Pretty much every graph that you saw for energy, for farmland, increased population, everything comes from peer-reviewed scientific paper or sources such as the International Energy Agency, which is the preeminent agency that forecasts energy production and consumption. So it either comes from these big agencies, multinational agency, or it comes from scientific papers. But the good news about En-ROADS as well, we have a list of assumptions that we make, and you can change those assumptions if you don't believe them. So, for example, one of the assumptions we're making is around the amount of land that's available for reforestation and afforestation, 550 million hectares. Now, if you have a different view on that, if you think it's more or less, you can adjust that variable as well.